Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Awesome Android Design. My name is Nick Butcher. I'm from Google. I work on the Android Developer Relations team, so it's my job to work with you guys to help you to build the best possible apps that you can. Here in Europe, there are 4 of us on the Android Developer Relations team. We're all based in London, but if you have any questions about developing apps, you want to know best practices and so on, you can get in touch with us. And the best way to get in touch with us is probably on Google+. So do many people here use Google+? It's probably about half the people here. That's cool. I'm not saying use Google+ because there's some corporate, thou shalt use Google technologies, but it just seems to be where all the Android developers are. So if you want to stay on top of what's going on, the latest libraries that's coming out, what people think of different developments in the Android world, then I really recommend you do start using it. Hopefully some of you might also know me from a show we do on YouTube called Android Design in Action. Any ADIA fans in the room? Hey, a few of them. Cool. So if you're interested in the topic of Android design, then you might be interested in this show, which is started off weekly. It's now about every couple of weeks. Myself and my colleagues Roman and Adam from our New York office get together and do deep dives on different design topics and how they relate to Android. So you can follow along at androiddesigninAction.com, which will get you to the YouTube playlist. So today, awesome Android design. What I wanted to cover today is talking about how you build an awesome app which follows the Android design guidelines. And so to do that, I think you need to understand Holo, which is our kind of design philosophy, our visual language. And you also need to embrace responsive design. So I'm going to go deep on these 2 topics, talking about what they are and how you build them into your applications. So starting at Holo. So Holo, like I said, is our visual language. It's kind of like a design philosophy as well. So just looking at some of the kind of stock widgets, the stock controls that you get to put your applications together with, you can see from the styling that they're very clean, minimal, flat. There's very kind of little use of gradients and textures and depth and so on. And you can see this is a trend that's getting picked up by lots of other systems out there as well. And that gives you a couple of things on Android. First off, we think it looks very nice. It's very pleasing to use. Secondly, it's going to help you to scale your UI. So this kind of visual theme scales from different size devices much, much better than anything that's kind of visually rich, uses lots of gradients and so forth. The other thing I think about Holo is that it kind of emphasizes the content over the Chrome which you're using to display your applications. It de-emphasizes any of the machinery, the things you need to use to get stuff done in your application, and instead emphasizes the actual content, the stuff that you're in an application because you care about. From a technical stance as well, Holo is a system theme as well, which from ICS onwards, OEMs are required to include and not modify. So it's therefore this stable base which you can build upon. It's this expectation of what an Android application looks like, and it's there on all devices, all modern devices. So I think this screen kind of demonstrates the Holo philosophy really, really well. It's the idea of stripping back anything which is superfluous. I mean, this is the compose screen from Gmail application. And you can see that anything that isn't to do with the, writing an email has been stripped away. There's no unnecessary, Chrome, there's no kind of borders, no containing boxes. Text boxes aren't even boxes, right? They're a line with a minimal amount of bounding to imply their function. And I think this elegantly kind of symbolizes what it means to design a Holo app, which is to strip away anything which is unnecessary until you get to the essence of the experience. Here's another example which I very much like, which is my Play library on my home screen on my tablet, which you can see there's the little title bar at the top saying My Library, but other than that, the entire user interface is content, right? It is an album cover, it is a book. It's not a bounding box which has something inside it, which has got some kind of effect applied to it. It's stripping back until the content is the interface. So some tricks for doing this is imagery works really, really well. If you have rich imagery to work with, let that be your user interface. Use things like overlay styles. So on this yellow book here, you can see we have an overlay saying the page number that I'm currently up to reading. So what this does is by containing it within the content itself, instead of being like a label attached to it, the content becomes the interface and it works well. We also apply this kind of content-first approach to some of the traditional controls. So here's a couple of things I've picked out from our standard widgets. We use these borderless buttons quite frequently throughout. So this is stripping back, the affordance of a button, some kind of beveling and some kind of grading that changes with it, and stripping it back to its bare essence of saying this is the function. And something that's very important when you're using techniques like this, stripping back, is it still needs to function like a button. It still needs to react like the user is expecting. So things like touch response. So as soon as you touch it, I would expect the entire interactive bounds to light up to show me inform me where I can interact with it in the future. If you're including multiple items like this example in the middle, you need to delineate them somehow. So the kind of bare minimum way of doing this is what we use these dividers. So hopefully it's come out well on this giant cinema screen. The single kind of pixel divider, kind of delineating, is like, instead of having like a heavy chrome of like a button or something like that, it's the minimum way of saying that these are two separate functions which you can perform. Click here does one thing, click here is a separate action, but with the minimum amount of unnecessary cruft. And the same goes with our kind of button bar style, where we strip it right back and just have these very, very fine dividers. Holo uses typography throughout the OS to provide kind of structure to your information. So instead of having a box around something to say, this is important, this is a title, just express it directly in the content itself. Use kind of a more expressive typographic palette. So here's some different varieties of the Roboto, which is the system font on Android. As you can see, there's quite a variety between different weights, like the thin and the heavy and so on, as well as the condensed one, which is getting some use now in Nexus 5 on the launcher. You might recognize that. So by using these different fonts, you can express structure much better than you can using kind of supporting structures. So the essence of what I'm trying to say is think of how a newspaper, when you glance at a newspaper, you can instantly tell the headline, this is super important. I can scan, this is a byline, this is like a subtext. You can tell what's important in the interface just by glancing at it. So that's the idea here, is to convey this kind of information by using a typographic structure. So on the subject of color, a lot has been made of KitKat's recent choice to kind of strip away the kind of this hot blue accent that used to be prevalent throughout Ice Cream Sandwich and Jelly Bean. Holo, as a design philosophy itself, is not prescriptive about color in any way at all. In some ways, in many ways, I'm very, very happy about this, because you would see some applications which would launch just using stock buttons, stock text boxes or whatever, and say, hey, we use Holo Blue, therefore we're a Holo app. But I think they're mostly missing the point that it's all about this design philosophy of stripping back the unnecessary and really kind of like refining your experience. So Holo doesn't kind of tell you anything about KitKat, anything about color at all. Instead, what we recommend is you use color for two things: for bringing branding into an application, and for providing kind of emphasis on certain areas to highlight certain features. So here's an example from the Google Play Music app, which picks orange as its brand color. If your application has a certain brand, this is a great way to embed your branding right into the application. So here they use it in a couple of ways. First off, with the action bar, obviously. So straight away, it gives you this, glanceable, oh, I'm in this app. You have this instant recognition from the branding. But they also use it to call out some of the more important things. So there's a way to this got it button, for example. If you want to, looking for a way to dismiss this kind of dialogue, it's very easy to kind of hone in on that and locate it. They wanted to call it out, as well as to create new radio station. So again, on the recent changes in KitKat, so we've toned down the kind of the Holo Blue, as it used to be known, to a more kind of neutral palette, as we talk about. The reason is, before, when you were pressing a button, whenever you hit a button, you got this, what we think of as like a jolt of high contrast, which kind of interrupted your flow, and it was very, very, hey, look at me, kind of contrasting color. Instead of that, what we wanted to do is have a subtle reaction, say, yeah, we acknowledge that you touched this, but we're not trying to grab the attention away from you. So if you want to recreate these, like from the system drawables, if you have a look at the system drawables for Holo Light and Dark, you can use these kind of hex values to kind of achieve the same effect. But it's still perfectly acceptable to, if you want to brand this with your own color. So say I was playing music, I could use a slight orange accent, but I'd probably use the same 20% opacity rather than grabbing the attention. It would be a subtle thing. So speaking of using color to provide branding, a lot of people kind of misunderstand how to do branding on Android. and they end up changing some things they shouldn't and not doing things they should. So we've put together this kind of a few guidelines on how to think of branding. I like to break down the designing Android app into a few different kind of aspects. So Android and Holo is not going to tell you anything about the information design. That's entirely down to your application, your information model. You know, are you a movie database and you're kind of like dealing with these are your objects, or are you like Gmail and these are your objects? Like Android is not going to tell you anything. That's all down to you. But when it comes to interaction design, so how you actually kind of like navigate around the application, or you know, things like pagination and so on, those are the cases where you do want to pay much more attention to Android. This is how you build an application which feels well designed or feels intuitive. It just means that you're following some well-established patterns. So don't kind of deviate from those, else your application will feel kind of harder to understand. But when it comes to the visual design, this is where it's your opportunity to kind of marry the two of them, to create an application which is both instantly recognizable as an Android application, as well as instantly recognizable as your brand. So a great way to do that is to take the stock kind of Android controls, like the buttons and the text boxes and so on, and bring your own personality, to bring your own coloring to them, to make them kind of feel right at home. So there isn't great system support in here at the moment, but there are some really awesome third-party tools which have sprung up to fill this need. So one of my favorite here is androidholocolors.com. So it's a great website where you just say, these are the controls I want to use in my application, and here's like my brand's accent color, and it will generate you all the drawables, all the XML, the styles and whatnot, and it downloads you in the right kind of folder structure. So you just drag and drop it into the res folder of your Android project, and they'll be available to use. A similar one, Action Bar Style Generator, does the same thing for the action bar. It'll generate all the styles you need, all the assets you need, just again drag and drop it into the right space. So these are awesome tools. So they'll really, really easily help you do that thing of marrying, like making your app look like Android but look like your brand. So that was kind of what we think Holo is. Now I'm going to go through some more practical tips of how you're going to implement it in your application. So the first and most obvious, I guess, is to inherit from the Holo themes. Holo system theme, one of those. Or if you're on an older application, then you can use Action Bar Compat library, which is part of the support library. Or Action Bar Sherlock will do something similar for you. And then next up is those themes provide you with a lot more than most people kind of realize. So those themes will not just kind of like change the kind of color of the action bar, the background of your window, or the color of a button. It gives you access to a bunch of different things provided by the framework, which you can use in your application. So here I've called out that you can access styles, dimensions, and drawables from the current theme. And if anyone's not familiar with this syntax here, if you see the kind of, if you're used to using saying like @style something, or you know, @android dot or colon style something, the question mark means take this from the current theme. So for example, if I'm, you know, had a theme set on my app that inherited from theme.holo.dark, for example, then it would give me a drawable or whatever appropriate for a dark background. If I were to then change my, you know, my base theme to theme.holo.light, it would give me a different drawable without me having to go back in here and change the style. And there's tons of the different styles available to you. You can read about all of them if you go to the documentation for Android.r.atra. They're all listed out there. This is where, you know, it's your dictionary of stuff that you can use to apply to your application. But I'm going to go through a quick kind of worked example to show you how you might use these in your applications. So the basic idea I want to walk through here is that we have some pretty ugly app that wants to kind of, we want to style, we want it to kind of like make it look more like an Android application. But instead of trying to just kind of copy the way that Android applications, or we think of Android applications look, we can actually just apply the same themes which are available from the current like Holo themes. So for example, if we start off with the first section of text there, the section header, and apply a certain style, this list separated text view style, this will do a few things for us. It will change the text presentation, like the size, the bold, the all caps, and apply this background drawable, which will stretch, you know, a 2-dit drawable all the way along the bottom, just by setting that one style on the text view. And then if we go to the items below, we can do something similar. Like we can set a text appearance to change the kind of like to a more standard text size. and set the borderless button style that we talked about before to remove the kind of affordances and give you that kind of a stateful drawable. So when you touch it, you get the right highlight and everything like that, just by setting these styles on it. And same again with those dividers we talked about. You can set those on the linear layout containing these items. So you get these kind of, hopefully that's come out, these dividers between the individual items. And there I've called out as well, you might want to use, well, you should be using divider padding here in order to apply the kind of hierarchy to show that, you know, this is one item and it's split between these two things. If you didn't use the padding, you just had a cross like that, it looked like 4 separate items rather than implying this hierarchy. And then lastly, you can do the same to the button bar at the bottom, replacing those buttons with the standard kind of button bar style, which will automatically just create the right text size and style for you. It'll add the dividers, and it'll set the stateful background on it. So those kind of simple things, by just referencing these theme attributes, we just applied 7 theme attributes to the application, and you can see the difference from one to the other is pretty stark. One looks like an Android application, and I know what to do with it, I know how to interact with it, I know that's a list header, and so on. And the other one kind of looks pretty ugly. So the kind of takeaway from this kind of thing is like lean on the framework, use the stock things, don't try and just like look like them, but just use the actual styles which are available to you. This will give you other benefits as well. So in kind of future versions of the platform, say we change the way that section headers look, your app will benefit from this. It will just kind of instantly inherit the right thing from the theme. So that was kind of applying the themes, but you can also take them as a base and then run with it. So for example here, say I want to show progress, show an activity indicator in my application. So the action bar offers a way of doing this. So you can, you know, set the progress bar, an indeterminate style one here, visible. But I can say, hey, that's great, it offers me this function, but that's not exactly how I want it to look. Like in this case, I think that's a bit too large. I'd like to kind of make it a bit smaller. We can then style that using the system themes, like inheriting from the system themes. So here we define a style that we want to apply to this activity indicator. Here we're just changing the size a little bit. And then we reference that style in a kind of action bar style. And then finally set that on our theme as such. So then we're using the kind of the system provided attribute. We haven't had to try and imitate it, try and build our own thing. We're using the system provided features, but we're then like styling it and building upon it. And the same goes the other way. You can access these things from your code and use them elsewhere. So here's an example where I want to insert my control. So here that the map has this kind of my location button, and I want to move it down by the size of the action bar height. We can do this from code by referring to one of these theme attributes to find out how big the action bar is, because it can change on different size devices and so on. So we just use this resolve attribute call to kind of get that, and then get the dimension pixel size into that from that value. And then finally, we can set it on the map. So yeah, the takeaway here, yeah, lean on the framework, use these provided things, don't try and imitate them because you'll end up getting it wrong and it will not inherit from all the kind of benefits of using the system. So next, I want to go deep on responsive design. So Android devices come in all sizes and shapes, different screen sizes, different orientations and so forth. And the sooner you kind of embrace this variety and kind of like design with it in mind, the happier your life will be building Android applications. So the idea here is that designing for Android really is to design for kind of like a variety of scale. So I think the web kind of like beat a good path for us. I mean, they've kind of embraced this kind of responsive design movement, and it's time that Android does the same, really. The good thing is that the Android framework is kind of built from the ground up with capabilities to provide you to deal with this variety. So I'm going to go through some techniques that you can use in your applications to do that. If you don't do responsive design, you can end up with situations kind of like highlighted here. So from left to right, we've got on the first one, we have these excessively long like line lengths. So text is running far too wide, and it's a very uncomfortable reading experience. Or in the second example there, we have this kind of very unbalanced look. So you can see that there's a lot of content kind of clustered up in the top and the left, and these like huge areas of white space below, which feels very uncomfortable. Or in the last one, it's kind of like a missed opportunity. Like you can see that there's a kind of these very small images when they could be using the space much more effectively to kind of show off the content in the application. So you want to avoid this kind of thing. Whether you like it or not, when you ship an application, it's going to run on phones and tablets. So people sometimes say, I haven't designed a tablet app, but they don't really realize that they're kind of already shipping an application which runs on tablets. And it's kind of, you're not really providing a very good experience for users. So we're going to go through some really, really simple stuff that you can do to provide a better experience to them. So the first thing you can do is combining content is a really, really easy way to better use the space available on the screen. So this is an example of the kind of master detail pattern where we have like a list-based system on the left, touching through on the phone goes to like a detail page. On a larger device, we can just kind of combine those together. This is going to have the advantage of kind of preventing having that kind of excessively wide content, so it's not going to run across the whole width of the screen. It can also provide more context by showing more things on screen at once. So hopefully a lot of you are using fragments already, so it can be really, really easy to do by keeping your code nice and dry and reusing it in these situations. So by using fragments, you can just define the code once, and so you use the very same fragment like on the phone and on the tablet. Like so on the phone, each fragment will fill the whole screen, whereas on the tablet, you just pull them in together. So here we're showing that we're using the framework resource system. So by providing this different version of activity home XML in the right folder, so in the SW720 folder, the tablet will just pick up a different layout, which instead of including a single fragment, includes 2 fragments. Really simple to do. Another kind of underused component, I think, which is offered by the support library, is the sliding pane layout. So this will help you to build applications doing this kind of master detail pattern, which scale really, really nicely. So the idea here is that you have this 2-pane content that you want to be able to scale up and down. So given sufficient width, you'll have, on the left, you'll have this kind of next to each other representation. But if there isn't enough room on the page, it'll show you the kind of content pane, and doing like a swipe across will reveal the kind of the master pane, and you can kind of swipe or tap to kind of close it back down. So if you have this master detail pattern in your app, this is like a really, really easy way to kind of have it, to show it without having to write too much code. So it's super simple. You just define this, you just include one of these sliding pane layouts and define 2 children for it, where the first child is going to be the left-hand pane and the second child is going to be the content pane. By setting the amount of space that each of these panes would like, the minimum width it can have, if the combination of those 2 is like larger than the screen, then you'll get the sliding pane behavior, the sliding behavior. And if it isn't, the content pane will, they'll show them next to each other. So super simple way to build this master detail. More people should be using it. So the next technique I want to go through is dealing with lists. So lists are, a really, really popular way of displaying collections of content, but they really, really don't scale up to kind of like wider devices. You end up with having these kind of like swathes of empty space, and it looks kind of very unbalanced. But the great thing is, it's super simple in Android to switch out from using a list representation to a grid view as the device gets bigger. So one really easy way of doing this is to just use a grid view, which switches the number of columns it shows based on how wide the device is. So in this example here, we're defining a grid view which references the number of columns to an integer resource. And then we just provide different versions of this integer resource depending on the size of the device we're on. So there we go. So if you're on color's gone wrong a bit there. So if you're on a smaller device, you'll get a single column layout, like on the list. Whereas if you go over 500 depths of width, so on a wider device like a tablet here, you're going to get 2 columns, and you can provide more different breakpoints there as you go on. Both, if you're familiar with grid view or not familiar with grid view, it extends from the same kind of subclass apps list view as list view. So it provides all the same kind of methods like view recycling and so on. It's really, really simple to use. So you can then Okay. So then in your backing code, you can reference that very, very same integer value. So just by querying that integer value to find out how many columns you need, you can then check that to find out if you're in single column mode. Then you can inflate one resource, which looks like the list item. So they will have like the image on the left and the description on the right, and so forth. Whereas if you are on a larger device, then you can inflate a grid view type resource, which might have a very different representation. So In this manner, you can kind of just use those integer resources and use the framework to do it all for you. You don't have to kind of like measure the screen size yourself. The framework will just deliver you the right number depending on what device you're running on. One of the easiest ways to make your application look better on larger devices is to, again, use the framework, the resources framework, to factor out all your dimensions and sizes and so forth. So by defining them in like a dimensions file, defining things like margins, type sizes, line spacing multipliers, all these things in a dimensions file, it makes it trivially easy to provide alternate values on larger devices. So one technique which I like to use is using like these first 3 lines here to show like default spacing major, default spacing minor, and micro. And I've set those as values which line up to the kind of the recommendations of the style guide of using like a 16 and 8 dip spacing for your major kind of spacing stuff. But then you can like super trivially replace those on a larger device. Say like the major spacing should be 32 dips when I'm on like a, you know, this looks like a 10-inch tablet or something like that. It will have a larger space. So these sound like, you know, looking at these as developers, it's so simple to do. This can have a massive effect on your application. Doing things like bumping up the body text size when you're on a larger, like on a tablet device, rather than a phone-size text size, has a huge effect on its legibility and readability. And this is such little effort. I really encourage you guys to look at using this. Most projects we work on, we tend to have like 4 or 5 different versions of these dimensions, depending on the device size. So it just kind of reacts to whatever you're on. The next technique I want to talk about is avoiding those overly wide kind of spans of text. If you can go down the kind of combination route I just talked about of having like more stuff on screen, that's great. But sometimes it doesn't make sense, or you want to, we just don't have anything else to show at the time. So one thing you can do is just use the margins just to make a much more comfortable reading experience. Some research I was reading shows that between 45 and 75 characters per line is the ideal kind of measure you want to look for, or around 66 is supposed to be the easiest to read. And if you go beyond that, you'll suffer legibility, you'll feel very uncomfortable to read it. So my colleague Roman has opened at source this really cool extension to linear layout, which just constrains the weight of it. So you can do something very simple, like just on this text view here, I've defined a maximum width, so it will grow up to that point, and it will never grow beyond that width in order to avoid this kind of uncomfortable measure. So yeah, check out from this link there, it'll take you to a gist, you can have a look at it. It's a cool way to kind of avoid these experiences. And the next one, when you think about responsive, is you kind of need to let your images relax a little bit and just have some kind of change in them. You can't kind of think in exact pixel dimension sizes. You can't guarantee that an image is going to be an exact size, because your layout needs to be able to scale to change for different situations. So Android provides a really easy way to handle this. So if you use the center crop style on your image view, then that will allow you to show a different portion of the image while maintaining the correct aspect ratio. So that means that this UI here could like stretch, it could go wider, it could go taller, and the images will still look great, and they'll still fill the space available to them, but they'll just use the center crop style to kind of maybe cut off the portion of the side or the top to maintain that aspect ratio for them. So my takeaway for doing responsive design is to kind of think about the larger devices. Try your application on larger and smaller devices and see how it runs. But also to lean on the framework, to use the framework's capabilities to override the values and provide a better experience. So hopefully all of you are already providing different drawables, all the different densities, the significant densities, in order to kind of have very crisp kind of drawables throughout your application. You should be doing the same with your layout. So you provide alternate layouts to provide the right size of experience based on the device it's running on. And you need to do the same with you can easily do the same by providing different dimensions, different text sizes, different paddings and margins and so on, again, so that it adapts to different device sizes. So that was the topic I wanted to talk about, so that's my prepared stuff. But I think there are some microphones at the corners, or you can just shout out questions if you have them. Hey.
How far should you go with providing files for different resolutions? Because, for example, Android Holo colors only goes up to XH DPI.
Yeah, so with so the question was, how high a density should you go with your drawables you provide? Android Holo Colors only goes up to XH at the moment, XH DPI. So with the kind of proliferation of XX HDPI devices, I think the time is here now to support them. So I would say going from M up to XX is now what you should be doing. And I know that the developer is updating as well to include XX HDPI assets in Holo Colors. Hey. So the question was, why is there no support for vector graphics? We've been around that kind of path many, many times, and I think there is some support for SVG. There are libraries out there which will turn an SVG into like an Android drawable, but there's always kind of like drawbacks to doing this. I don't think anyone's really kind of found a good way to marry up a scalable graphic that will work well on the Android platform, as well as the fact that there's going to be a performance issue as well. If you're kind of like converting from a scalable, you have to turn it into a raster format at some point to blitz it onto screen. So it's when do you take that hit, when do you do it? So I think the kind of current situation is fair enough. I don't think it's going to go much further. I don't think we're going to see, a huge number more densities coming on the market, hopefully, because we've reached such a huge, such a high density point at the moment now. I can't see it being like an ongoing issue. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks very much.